Has the true essence of Heritage Day slipped away? Can South Africans remain true to being Africans in this modernized society? Are traditional practices like ukutwala and virginity testing an infringement on human rights? Have the South African white communities embraced the idea of Rainbow Nation? What time is it? It's question time. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. The 24th of September is an annual public holiday celebrated as National Heritage Day here in South Africa. This year, the theme of the Department of Arts and Culture is celebrating 20 years of democracy. Tell your story that moves South Africa forward. On this day, South Africans across the spectrum are encouraged to celebrate their culture and the diversity of their beliefs and traditions. In 2005, a media campaign sought to rebrand, so to say, the holiday as National Bride Day in recognition of the South African culinary tradition of holding informal backyard barbecues or braais. But what is the real meaning of Heritage Day? And how should it be celebrated? My guest is Sandile Memela. He's also with the Department of Arts and Culture, but also a commentator on arts and culture matters. Mr. Memela, welcome. I really appreciate your time. You know, when we were preparing for the show, there was a tweet from one of our viewers who asked whether South Africans understand what Heritage Day is.
I think they do, and one has got to say that with a resounding yes, they do. And I say so because we must bear in mind that the heritage that we're talking about isn't something that started in 1994. It's not 20 years old. And I say so because we must always make a distinction between history and heritage. And history is that which has happened, occurrences and past events that are factual and accurate and correct, if you like. But heritage, it's where a people of a country consciously select and choose events, personalities, and happenings that have helped to move them forward. Okay. And increasingly, we have seen that happen in this country because we cannot run away from the fact that when it comes to South Africa, it's actually a collision of two cultural forces, if you like. Western imperialism and colonization, and Africanism, and the desire of a people to create a better society that would result in a better world. So in the last 20 years, after a struggle that has been going on for over 3 centuries, we are beginning to see the fruits of this heritage. And this heritage is the ideals, the visions, the principles that our forefathers and ancestors fought for, which was to create a democratic and free society that would be just and equal.
Okay. Is there a common heritage for a common people in South Africa?
Let's not forget that in our coat of arms, the national motto is united in diversity. We acknowledge that we come from different language groups, from different religious groups, from different tribes and ethnic groups, and we speak different languages and see things differently, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't any unity in what we do. We look at the national anthem, we look at the national symbols, we look at the flag. We are forging, we are building this common identity amongst the people of this country. And interestingly, I don't know if you are aware, research that was published through the developmental indicators reveals that over 52% of South Africans see themselves as a common people with a common heritage and identity. And this is in contrast to only 8% who identify themselves through their race or tribe or language groups. So it's just that as South Africans, we tend to be too, hard on ourselves and don't appreciate the majestic and giant strides that we have taken in terms of building this nation.
Okay.
And that in itself, considering where we come from, that people are beginning to identify themselves as South Africans, which is a common identity, and refer to common symbols. Yes, there are controversies maybe around the national anthem, but it's only a fringe minority that continues to see it as problematic.
Now, does it mean, therefore, that I don't have to see myself as black?
No. You see, you can choose to be anything that you want to be. Black, white, green, or pink. But your identity must be specifically rooted, grounded on your South Africanness, where you uphold all the principles and ideals of our constitutional democracy. And this is about treating everyone primarily with dignity and respect that they deserve. And this is about avoiding things like hate speech. And this is about being patriotic and doing things that will actually ultimately result in us living in a just and equal society. You can call yourself black as long as you do not threaten other people's interest or exclude others, because even the whole notion of black in today's society has become very complicated. The black society has fragmented, if you like, because of freedom. Gone are those days where we would have a Steve Biko using perhaps what one could call, not pejoratively, an oversimplification of blackness. Blackness now is so broad and general and so free and fluid that you can be the black that you want to be, and no one has the right to dictate to you what blackness means.
Now, how do you not lose Africanness in celebration of a Heritage Day in South Africa?
You actually can't lose your Africanness, because not just because of our geographical location, but whether we admit it or not, this is an African country. Now, we need to revive our own history, because not many of us remember that Heritage Day is actually on the 24th, which for a long period when black people were excluded, we used it to honor the memory of King Shaka Zulu. You know, that guy was a nation builder. I mean, other people may have their own views about that. But we are in Africa, and much as there have been efforts previously to actually exclude and marginalize and even degrade African culture and identity, when you look around, it is there. Well, it's different when you are in the melting pot of the urban areas like the cities, where people like you and me, much as we are Africans, converse in English. But I presume that we are both fluent in our own languages, and our cultures are very much alive in the rural areas. And there are people within the urban areas, including the middle class, who get whose families get torn apart because of this dictate to choose between embracing African culture or just pushing and implementing what we can call as westernization or neocolonialism.
Okay. You know, I want us to take a break. When we return, let's look at how literature, music, attire, you know, arts and culture can be used to preserve and perhaps celebrate our heritage as South Africans. This is Question Time. Please don't go away. We'll return shortly.
SABC News, we've got Africa covered.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today is Sandile Memela. Sandile is an author and a commentator, a writer on arts and culture matters. Now, cultural heritage, for instance, there are things like orality and performances, there's dance and music, rituals and festivals, cultural traditions. But I want us to look firstly at, let's look at music, for instance. How do we use music to preserve our heritage, or perhaps protect it and celebrate it at the same time?
It's something that Africans have done for centuries, where they express their identity through the lyrical content of pieces that they have done, and they articulate their hopes and aspirations, and they draw attention to the problems that they confront in life, in their day-to-day realities. Take, for instance, a guy like Enoch Sondonga. I mean, he was a 24-year-old when he died, and he's the guy who wrote the Nkosi Sikelel. Now, here is this guy who came up with an anthem that defined African identity and our relationship not only to each other but to God. And he used the lyrical content to bring together, to fuse different African languages. Right, and these are little important details that are not highlighted and celebrated, and many people are not aware of them. Okay, fine. You also look at African music. If you ask in South Africa, perhaps, what is the best-selling genre of music, I don't think that traditional music, so-called, fares badly. You know, you take gospel, where we see the fusion of African spirituality with Western religion. It's also one of the most popular types of music. So our artists are continuing to express and define our identity and aspirations through this. It's just that they are not given the acknowledgement and recognition that they deserve. But when we look over the last 20 years, you now find various awards and ceremonies to recognize and affirm them. And a given time, they will be elevated to the pedestal and be given the status and recognition that they deserve. Artists are like prophets. They are very talented, conscious, spiritually grounded people who, through what they do, bring together not only a people's wishes, but their relationship to each other and God. And one can, for instance, use an artist like Thomas Chauke. He's a hero in this country. The fact that maybe the mainstream media doesn't see him as such doesn't take anything away from him. And there are various reasons why that happens. You take someone like Mahlatini, you take someone like Black Mambazo, you take someone in the modern age like Simpiwe Dana, you take someone like Miriam Makeba, you take someone like Letambulu. The list is endless, and you can see that our artists for a very long time have been in the forefront of using their talent, their artistry to not only champion the vision and hopes for a new society, but to define who we are and where we come from.
But the type of people that you have just outlined, they don't get, as many gigs, as, the others who sing this other type of music, which may not necessarily be as rich in, content as the people that you have just mentioned.
No, you're very correct, but it would be very not right to determine an artist's popularity or success through the number of gigs that they get. When you go back to our communities, in the townships, in the rural areas, you find that these people continue to do what they are best at, highly gifted in, and they are embraced and celebrated by their communities And it is perhaps for this reason that the government itself is using its national days, for instance, to create platforms for them. And of course, you find that at very high profile and significant events of any nature, artists, especially musicians, are always featured there. So the gigs, I guess it's because in terms of our progress and development as a society, we still have our fellow South Africans who do not realize that the richness of our society lies in these artists and the music that they play.
Literature. Are we writing enough?
It's a very good question. You asked that question when this year, as indigenous African language speakers, we are celebrating the centenary or 100th anniversary of Ikyala Lamawele, one book that is an African classic. And of course, you will find that the department has done its best to avail it through not only republishing it, but when we have National Book Week, we distribute it freely amongst young people and other stakeholders. And of course, I want to believe that if you were to go to any library, you would find it together with many other books written in African languages. I know for a fact that African people in this country do write, and the only thing that limits them is that the people who decide what goes out into the market are not people who appreciate and actually speak our language, even in an ideological sense. There are many frustrated writers out there who have captured and reflect on their experiences and the meanings, not only of growing up under apartheid, but overcoming it. But there are still some ideological controllers and handlers out there who believe that those kind of voices that are authentic and committed and display and express Africanness should not be given space. It's a contestation not only for ideas but for cultural dominance. I do know that Africans are writing, and in the last 20 years, South Africa has produced, more writers than at any other time, and many of them, like Zakes Mda, have become international icons, and it's something that cannot be taken for granted. And when you look at international competitions, you find that no African writers are standing alongside their world counterparts. It's a pity that when it comes to African language writers, again, just like their musical counterparts, they are not given that acknowledgement and recognition because for some reason we are misled to believe that the lingua franca for this country and the world is English.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, let's look at other aspects, including attire or clothing. This is Question Time. Please don't go away.
South Africans survived 2014.
Many of us actually were given bursaries by state-owned enterprises, but the state shrunk, telecom was privatized, and now you are sitting with huge unemployed people, but huge backlogs in terms of infrastructure that could develop the same young people.
It's in our hands, and our future is up to us. It's a tough year, and tough decisions will have to be made by the government. It's an election year, which makes it difficult to make tough decisions. I mean, it's tough to make tough decisions. It's especially tough in an election year.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
This former breadbasket of Africa, playing host to SADC leaders.
I feel humbled and yet greatly honored at being appointed the chairman of SADC.
When I was a student, Harvard was only my visible college. My formal classes but I was also a student in an invisible college.
The outbreak in West Africa is the world's deadliest to date. It's centered on Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, with cases also reported in Nigeria.
Catch news at 8, 7 days a week. Be informed.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today is award-winning journalist Sandile Memela, who's also a commentator and many other things. You see, we were just talking about literature before we went to the ad break. And before we go into attire and clothing, I want us to talk briefly about your book, His Master's Voice, right? You have authors and writers like you who give themselves time to write. But are you writing what we want to read?
I think there is no doubt that we are writing what we understand to be intuitively connected to the experiences of our people who are conscious that part of the problem in this land is economic inequality. It needs to be challenged, who know that we need to do away with prejudice and discrimination. It needs to be challenged, who know that we need to deal with the issue of land ownership. It needs to be put on the table and challenged and resolved. But when we write about these things, the people who control the publishing industry are made to feel uncomfortable, and as a result, they would marginalize such literature. This book that is self-published, of course, has done extremely well for itself, considering that it was written in 1988-87 about the experiences of young black professionals in white-controlled corporate in South Africa. Who would not want to read such literature? But of course, it's the kind of literature that would be perceived to be militating against the interest of some segments of our society, and as a result, it was declined and rejected. But after 22 years, I felt that it's a story that needs to be told, and using the little money that I had, I published it, and it has been extremely popular. I'm getting invitations from parts of Africa who are interested in this kind of literature, where the story of black professionals in white-controlled corporates is told.
Is it not against the spirit of reconciliation?
No, it's not against the spirits of reconciliation. It's actually an expression of the diversity of our experiences in this beautiful land. That yes, it is true that we do have the haves and the have-nots, but we also have the want-mores.
Okay.
I think it's important for us to say that only truth will bring us together and make us to truly reconcile, not its suppression.
And would you say our white counterparts have embraced the spirit of the Rainbow Nation as we celebrate this Heritage Month?
Look, I can't speak for them. I think they can speak for themselves, but what I know is that there is increasing impatience and anger at the fact that I think black people, Africans largely, think that they've been extending this hand of friendship, and of course it is not being returned. The gesture is not being returned by their white counterparts, but it would be a generalization to say so. Because look, we know that for a very long time, South Africa as a country was a pariah to the continent, to the world. And white fellow South Africans are unfortunately, to a large extent, foreigners in their own country, and they still have to learn about black people, and it's not easy for one to break out of their cocoon, but there are individuals amongst them who are examples or beacons of hope and are showing the light that no, it is possible for it to happen. And one can't go on and cite them, but the list doesn't only begin recently. One can think of a figure like Beas Nodier, one can think of someone like Bram Fischer, one can think of a Brian Bunting, one can think of, if you like, a Helen Suzman. So yes, there are those who've always championed and supported a non-racial society in its own way.
Which would be a good heritage to maintain. Now, you also have things like Ugutwala, which I referred to here. Are they part? What is this? Is this a tradition? Is it a heritage which we must maintain?
Look, it's something that was done in the olden days. And I guess in today's society where we have the Constitution and our young girl children and women need to have the right to choose for themselves what they want or do not want, I do not think that a cultural practice or tradition like Ugutwala is in line with our Constitution. But the good thing is that, of course, the cultural space is part of the national dialogue. It's part of the conversation that is going on in this country. And as we sit and talk, I know that South Africans, especially those who are directly affected by this, are actually deliberating on this issue to come with an answer, a resolution that will make sure that Ugutwala and all other cultural traditions and customs are actually aligned to the Constitution, because the Constitution is our premier document that should shape and guide our attitude, our conduct, our behavior to ourselves and to other people. If Ugutwala is about abducting and taking any girl, child or woman by force, I think it should not be encouraged. And the people who practice it should be asked to have a rethink about it.
Okay. Now, this a slide which was on our screen there, which shows, it's a picture of, or rather pictures of various groups of South African origin. You have Tonga, Bavenda, Swati, Zulu, and all that. And one can't help it but notice that it's women. Whenever, look at it. Whenever people want to talk of cultures and tradition, they always want to present women.
It's not a mistake. You must remember that even the continent itself is referred to as Mother Africa, and women will always be the custodians and carriers of our culture. I think, unfortunately, they are not appreciated for what they are worth. Okay. Because I think without women, we would be nowhere, we would be nothing. And we do need to acknowledge and celebrate them. And I would want to look at this through, I think, rose-colored glasses, where I say it's a celebration of their motherhood.
Quick one as we close. When you look at me right now, do you see somebody who is proud of his heritage just because I'm wearing these colors, or is there any significance, in as far as attire is concerned?
Well, it would be easy for me to conclude that, of course, the way you are dressed and the way you speak actually articulates and expresses your African pride and self-confidence. But the most important point about it is that how you look is an outward expression of what is in your head and your heart. And I think you are a symbol, a representation of African pride. And of course, we do encourage people to express their diversity through their fashion and what they wear.
Thank you very much. Let's leave it there. That was question time for today. Goodbye.
Good evening and welcome to Business Review. The markets are closed this Heritage Day, so we thought we'd delve into the very serious business of musical activism tonight and look at the market for heritage music. Shortly, we'll be crossing live to the 30th anniversary celebrations of Shifty Records in Newtown.